Hello, boss. Yes. Huh? What? You want to fire me? Why you want to fire me? I work so hard. I work 24 hours. I work 24-hour OT. You not even pay me the OT. Why you want to fire me, boss? Huh? Economy no good. Huh? Cost too high. Huh? I'm not efficient enough. Huh? People too much. Huh? Why you want to fire me, boss?
No! God, please, no! No!
Hi, good day, doctor. My name is Alvin. So, our study topic today is the unemployment rate in Malaysia, where our study objective is to try and figure out what is the factors that really influence the unemployment rate in Malaysia. As you can see, our team developed two different models that we consider different numbers of dependence variable to examine whether is it GDP influence the unemployment rate, is it the population growth rate influence the unemployment rate, or is it the inflation, which is the CPI, influence the unemployment rate, or the labor force participation rate itself influence the unemployment rate, or the unknown variable, which is we measure as the error terms, influence the whole models, which is the unemployment rate itself. Therefore, we're going to put in all the data into the e-bills and we're going to show you the result in the first slide. So let's go to the first slide. Okay, now win again. So in this model, the team are putting 4 different dependence variables into the model A to examine in a more quantitative way to see whether all 4 this data, all 4 this variable are influenced the Malaysia's unemployment rate. And meanwhile, we are going to look at which of the factors have the most influence to the Malaysia unemployment rate, which match with our study objective. We are looking at the factors that are influence unemployment rate. Is it a GDP? Is it a population growth rate? Is it CPI or the labor participation rate? So in the further slide, we are going to develop a new model, which is the model B, to compare both of this model and with a different dependence variable to see which model can better illustrate the factors, the reason why it influence Malaysia's unemployment rate. So let's move to the next slide. Yes, it's Alvin again. So for this model, we are putting 3 different variables into the model B, where the GDP, CPI, as well as the labor force participation rate, because we would like to examine with or without the population growth rate will impact the unemployment rate in Malaysia, and we putting all this data into the e-bills and compares the output in the further slide. So what we're waiting for, we're gonna move to the further slide to see which model better explain the factors that are really impact Malaysia's unemployment rate. This is Alvin again. So in this slide, we are going to select which model that are truly illustrate the factors influence Malaysia's unemployment rate, where we are using 3 different criteria to help us to choose which model are suitable. Which are these 3 criteria? Is adjusted R-square, archive info criteria, SWOT criteria. So let's go through a bit. Which the adjusted R-square are suggest us to choosing the highest indicator, which is the model A. Meanwhile, the archive info criteria are suggest us to choosing the lowest one, which reference to the model B. And lastly, SWOT criteria are recommended to choose a lowest one, which is the model B as well. So after all these considerations, the team are decided to choose model B to be better explain the unemployment rate in Malaysia. So into the further slide, our friend Kien Boon will conduct a diagnostics test, which is the Rangsi test, and all this testing to test whether our model are really suitable to be explained under the assumptions of econometric. And I'm gonna pass this to Kien Boon. It's on your hand, Kien Boon.
Moving on to the diagnostic test. So, the first step of the diagnostic test we will use is the Rangsi reset test. The Rangsi reset test is to use to assess whether a regression model is correctly specified or suffer from the misspecification. In this test, the null hypothesis assumes that the model is not specified, while the alternative hypothesis suggests that the model is misspecified. As shown in the picture, the test result indicate a p-value of 0.335, which is greater than the significant level of 0.05. Since the p-value is insignificant at the 5% level, we fail to reject the null hypothesis. This implies that the module is not specified. Therefore, the module is appropriately specified and adequately represent the true relationship between the dependent and independent variables. As a result, the assumptions of the regression module hold true, and the findings from the analysis can be considered reliable. Furthermore, we also apply the Jack-Miller normality test to examine whether the residuals are normally distributed. The null hypothesis states that the residuals are normally distributed, while the alternative hypothesis asserts that the residuals are not normally distributed. Based on the test results, the p-value is 0.8387, which is greater than the significant level of 0.05. Thus, we fail to reject the null hypothesis, indicating that the residuals are normally distributed. These findings suggest that the errors conform to the normality assumption of the classical linear regression module, ensuring valid statistical inference. Moreover, we also use the variance inflation factors to test for the presence of multicollinearity in the module. The results shown in the picture indicate that the central variance inflation factor values for the GDP growth rate, inflation rate, and the labor force participation rate are 1.0583, 1.1193, and 1.0961 respectively, all of which are well below the threshold of 5. This indicates that we fail to reject the null hypothesis, confirming that there is no multicollinearity in the module. This implies that the independent variables are not highly correlated with each other, ensuring the stability and reliability of the module's parameter estimate.
Moving to the Bush-Group-free LM test. This test aims to test if there is autocorrelation assumption violated in this model. Begins with the null hypothesis, which is there is no autocorrelation, and alternative hypothesis is there is a higher order autocorrelation in this model. The output of the LM test is shown. We can see the probability of chi-square or p-value is 0.0006. The decision rule by using p-value approach is to reject the null hypothesis if the p-value is less than the significant level of 5%. Since the p-value of LM test is 0.006, which is less than 0.05, there is sufficient evidence for us to reject the null hypothesis at 5% level of significance. As conclusion, there is a higher order autocorrelation as seen in this model. Therefore, we use the Cochrane-Occult method to address this higher order autocorrelation.
Firstly, the Cochrane-Occult method starts with generating a new variable by using command as follows, where it means to generate a new variable called u and assign the residual from previous regression to u. Next, this command estimates a simple autoregression model where the current value of u is regressed on its past value. Moving to the third command, where this command estimates a regression model where the dependent variable is a transformation of the original variable UR or the unemployment rate, while the independent variables are the constant term, the laggard value of GDP, the laggard value of CPI, and the laggard value of labor. For the fourth command is to generate a new variable called U1 by subtracting specific values from the original variable of UR and laggard value of GDP, CPI, and labor. Then, we will continue the steps by changing U1 to U2 and U3 with the coefficient generated in the output. For our test, we'll do the adjustment until U3 because there is just a slight difference between the coefficient of U2, which is 0.615170, and U3, which is 0.615183. This indicates that we have done the Cochrane-Occult method to address the autocorrelation problem in the model. However, to ensure that we have successfully addressed the autocorrelation problem, we'll do the LM test again by using the same hypothesis, level of significance, and decision rule. As a result, the probability chi-square or the p-value is 0.0843, which is greater than 0.05. Hence, there is no enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis, and the autocorrelation issue has been resolved by the Cochrane-Occult method.
Now let us move to the next test, Bridge-Wagon-Gottfried test. This test is for testing heterogeneity in our regression model. Let's start with the hypothesis. The null hypothesis, H0, assumes homogeneity, meaning the error variance is constant. On the other hand, the alternative hypothesis, H1, assumes heterogeneity, meaning the error variance is not constant. If we reject H0, it implies that heterogeneity is present in the model. The p-value for the test result is 0.0973. We compare this to the significance level of 5%, which is 0.05. Since the p-value is greater than 0.05, we do not reject the null hypothesis. This means there is insufficient evidence to suggest the presence of heterogeneity in the model. After that, we also use the white test to evaluate whether the error terms in our regression model has a constant variance. The hypothesis for the white test same with the Bridge-Wagon-Gottfried test. The null hypothesis assumes that the model is homogeneity. The alternative hypothesis assumes the heterogeneity. The p-value of this test is 0.0844, which is greater than 0.05. Therefore, we do not reject the null hypothesis. The result is not statistically significant at the 5% level.
Following, we look into the interpretation of slope coefficient estimates. First of all, the coefficient of GDP, which is negative 0.03855, an increase in GDP of 1% will lead to a decrease in the percentage of unemployment by 0.039%. These inverse relationships align with the economic theory, which when there's a higher economic growth tends to reduce the unemployment rate by creating more jobs opportunities. Next, for the coefficient of inflation rate, it is negative 0.05834. This indicates that when there is an increase in 1% of inflation rate, there will be a decrease in unemployment rate by 0.058%. This reflects a Phillips curve hypothesis when inflation and unemployment rate will have a negative relationship in the short run. Lastly, we come to the labor force participations, which is 0.04993. An increase in the labor force participation by 1% will lead to an increase in the unemployment rate by 0.05%, which we round up the 0.04993 participation rate coefficient. This result may suggest that the higher labor force can increase competition for jobs and therefore will lead to a slightly rise of the friction unemployment rate. Okay, now we look into the correlation graph of unemployment rate versus GDP and unemployment rate versus population growth. First of all, there's a weak negative correlation, which is negative 0.405 between GDP growth and unemployment rate, indicating that there's a unemployment rise. Economic growth tends to slow, highlighting the link between job creation and economic performance. Similarly goes to the population growth. Negative 0.432 correlations also shows a weak negative correlation with unemployment, suggesting a higher unemployment may associate with slower population growth, possibly due to people moving away or slower births given. And now with the correlation analysis between the unemployment rate and inflation. The weak negative correlation, negative 0.318 between inflation and unemployment, align with the Phillips curve relationship. The Phillips curve relationship is actually when there is a low unemployment rate on the market, there will be less workers available for businesses to compete. Therefore, businesses will offer them higher wages. And now the higher wages will increase the consumer spending, driving demand for goods and services, which pushes the price up and therefore cause inflation. Lastly, we come to the correlation analysis between the labor force participation rate and unemployment rate. This shows a weak positive relationship, which is 0.368. The positive correlation suggests that when there is more people joining the labor force, the unemployment rate tends to increase slightly. This result may indicate a lower job creation rate in the country, as the economy is unable to generate enough jobs to match the growing number of job seekers, leading to a rise in unemployment.
As a summary, these econometric studies investigate factors that influencing the unemployment rate using two models, which is Model A that have the population growth as a variable and Model B that excluding population growth. Both models are analyzed the impact of GDP growth, inflation CPI, labor force participation rate, and in Model A we have population growth. To evaluate which model is more suitable, adjusted R-square, AIC, and SIC are used. As a result, Model B is the most suitable for our study. Model B is then undergo several diagnostic tests to validate the model assumption and address issues like autocorrelations. Moving to the recommendation part, we suggest to use Model B for forecasting and policy recommendations, as it provides a better balance between simplicity and statistical fit. While the policy suggestion is, we would like to suggest to boost GDP growth by using policy that aim at the economic expansion that can reduce the unemployment rate. Besides, a moderate inflation management could further aid in reducing unemployment issues in Malaysia. Last but not least, the labor force participation can be increased by programs that address the labor market inefficiencies.
This video introduces you our econometric model about the unemployment rate. Although the correlation between the independent variable with the unemployment rate is relatively weak, but it aligns with our economic theories. This video provides you a better understanding on the unemployment rate and its factor quantitatively. We hope that this video can provide a valuable insight to the policymakers in the future.
Thank you for watching!